Hey, I'm Jake McNeal. We're going to be continuing right where we left off from the last devlog, so if you haven't checked that out, go check that out first and then come back to this video. But today specifically, we're going to be going over how I made Super Mario 64 sliding physics in Unity without using rigid bodies. Now my goal for this game, which right now I'm calling Jumbo, is to recreate that special feeling that came alongside with the 3D platformers / collectathons from the Nintendo 64. For this particular devlog, I wanted to focus on one specific element from those games and try and see how well I could recreate it within Unity. One of my absolute favorite parts of those games were within Donkey Kong 64 and Mario 64. They had these levels where you could slide down these slopes, and they were very challenging, but they were also very rewarding if you completed the challenge. Now I wanted to add an authentic feel to this, so I didn't want to use rigid bodies, and the main reason why I didn't want to use rigid bodies is because there's a lot added to that physics system that wouldn't be present within the Nintendo 64. So I first needed to go back and play through some of these levels and try and diagnose how they would have created these or reverse engineer them and figure out how to implement it within my own game. So I came to the conclusion that the physics could be broken down into a few major areas. Gravity, the downward direction of the slope, player's input, inertia, the speed, the animations, and some particle effects. Now before starting this project, I actually did have to address some issues. The previous code for my entire game so far has been all in one script, and needless to say, it got a little long and complicated. And this worked great for prototyping, but now that we're past pretty much like the basic needs of that, I think it's a better idea to break it down into systems where I can use inheritance and actual object-oriented programming. So to visualize this change, I created a flowchart to basically get my thoughts onto a piece of paper. I then zoomed the focus in to a UML diagram that would entail the movement inheritance structure for just Jumbo himself. So now I have an easy way to code the sliding movement without being interrupted by code that I've already created for the player's basic movement. And with all that out of the way, I went and ripped the model for Peach's Secret Slide from Super Mario 64 and I put it into the game. And this way I could kind of play Super Mario 64 while testing and kind of recreating that same feeling in Unity. So with that imported, I went to work on figuring out the downward direction. I am using a character controller, and the character controller has a method called onController collider hit, and that allows you to get the current face that the collider's in a collision with, and you can get its normal from that. And with the normal, we can cross that with the world's up position to find a cross plane. And from that, we can use that cross plane to cross, I know this is a lot of crosses, but we can use that across plane to cross with the normal of the model or the face of that model that you are currently touching, and that will give you the downward direction for that specific face that you are touching. So luckily for me, I had already, from the last two devlogs, created a gravity system and player movement based on the input of the joystick. So when I added this to the downward direction of the slope, I was able to see how well that the player input was working. But with all this, it's not even close to being done. We still need inertia. That's a big one. So to create the sense of inertia, I took the normalized velocity of the last frame and I added that to the current direction of the player's input plus the downward direction of the slope. And then I added the speed onto that, and with that you start to get this slow sense of inertia. So from here, to make it look a little bit better, I made the player's rotation slowly interpolate to the value of the move direction. Now, right now it feels 100% just super stiff and just wrong. And that's because there's no animations and there's no real like feedback for what's happening on screen based on like the input of the player. So I went to create animations for it. And I started with a simple one of Jumbo just sitting down on the slope. Then I went to create two more animations, one for leaning to the left and one for leaning to the right. And then I brought those into Unity and just made a blend tree that would smoothly transition between the 2 or the 3 animations. Now, Princess Peach's secret slide is a rather short and pretty easy level for sliding. I ripped another model from Cool Cool Mountain from Super Mario 64, and I brought that into Unity because that one's a little more challenging and, in my opinion, a lot more fun. So with that, I then tried the animations mixed with the code on that new imported model, and it was already leaps and bounds better than the one before. It just looks so much better with the animations added onto it, and it's a lot of fun. But this isn't the end. If you look at Super Mario 64, you can see that if you press forward, he leans forward, speeds up, and if you hold back, he'll actually slow back down as he leans backwards. So I created 2 more animations, one for leaning forward, one for leaning backwards, and then I added that to the blend tree. It's no longer just a 1-axis blend tree, it is a 2-axis. Now, calculating the speed proved to be somewhat difficult for me. I tried a couple of various different ways to do it, some way more complicated than others, but none of them really felt like how Super Mario 64's would have worked. So when I was looking at Super Mario 64, I noticed that if you were to hold back as much as you could, he would slide, but he would come to a minimum slide speed. He would never come to a complete stop unless you were like on like a flat ground, right? If you were to press forward, he would eventually max out on his speed potential. And then also the speed of Mario was directly affected by the angle of the slope that he was on. So I created a minimum and a maximum sliding speed, and then I made sure that the maximum speed was always the target speed if the angle was 60 degrees or higher. Everything from 0 to 60 degrees there could go from the minimum slide value to the maximum slide value. I then added the ability to slow down and speed up based on the input of the Y value from the joystick. Now, to do this, if you hold forward all the way on the joystick, the target speed will try and become the maximum slide speed value. If you were to hold back on the joystick, it would go to the minimum slide speed value. Then, calculating all of these things together, you can get the target base speed, then you can smooth damp between the targets or the current speed and the target speed that we are trying to achieve. From here, I wanted to add some flair to the game, and I haven't done this in any of the previous devlogs, but I went in to add some particle effects. Specifically in Mario 64, if you watch him slide down the slopes, you'll see a 2D image of a little cloud, or like a dust cloud, I should say, coming out from behind him. I wanted to create something similar to that, but this isn't the Nintendo 64, so I can add a little bit more to it. So I created a low poly cloud in Blender, and I imported it into my game and added that as the reference to the particle that would be emitted by the particle system. Every time that the player has traveled a certain amount of distance, a cloud will be emitted, and when it's really fast, you'll start to see it trailing behind the player before they just slowly disappear. So then the last thing to do was to set up the state manager that would go between the player's basic motion and the sliding movement. So we can go from our basic locomotion, and then when we enter the sliding area, we immediately go into the slide. We can slow down, we can speed up, we can turn. And everything is directly affected by this system. So let's just try and get down this hill and see if we can make it to the end. So I'm gonna go as fast as possible. And it's a little unfair for me because I've played this about 1,000 times. Alright, so here we go. We can turn. The inertia pushes us forward. Shit, this is the hardest part. Okay, cool. Okay, we're coming on this slide. Woo, barely made that, barely made that. Okay, almost there, at the very end. Ooh. Oh, that was terrible. Absolutely horrible at the end, but I made it through. So that's my implementation of Super Mario 64's sliding physics within Unity. I hope that you liked it and you found it somewhat reminiscent of the Nintendo 64 games such as like Donkey Kong 64 and Super Mario 64. If you did, consider giving this video a like. It took a long time to make this video and I really hope that you enjoy it. And on another note, if you guys are into game jams, I am going to be part of a game jam coming up this month actually. There will be a link to it in the description below, so if you guys are interested in that, I'm going to be playing the top 5 games, I believe, from that game jam on my channel. So go ahead and check it out, it's in the description, and I'll see you guys in the next devlog.